Emily Bretcher will kick things off. The sophomore, a DD of 2.4. This 105B.
It's a good dive. You're going to see this dive competed by a lot of the athletes, so you really need to execute it perfectly in order to get some big scores. She gets a lot of height off of the diving board. I like her position in the air. A little bit too much of a splash when she hits the water. Not a perfectly clean entry, but a good way to start her meet.
See 5 judges. First score on the board. And mentioned for Brooke Schultz, the reigning NCAA champ, but she did not have a good morning, reason that she is diving second in this order.
Absolutely. She struggled on 2 of her dives. Barely squeaked into this final, coming in 7th place.
DD of 2.8 on this 52-35D.
A back 1.5 with 2.5 twists, slightly over-rotated, maybe a little bit too much adrenaline. The kind of first dive of the meet, you're a little bit nervous, so she may have to shake some of that off. As a result, she over-rotated it a little too splashy. Probably not the start she was looking for, but 6s, 6.5s isn't too bad.
It's now an Aggie from Texas A&M, a senior that grew up in Midland, Texas, Haley Allen.
Oh, see, that was a beautiful looking dive in the air. She's a very graceful diver. I like her positions. It's a beautiful tight tuck, beautifully pointed toes. Not a whole lot of power coming from her. Unfortunately, she over-rotates this dive. You'll see here as she hits the water, her legs are past vertical. So she gets 5s, a couple 5.5s from the judges.
Haley Allen began her career at Ohio State before transferring over to College Station in Texas A&M from Alberta, Canada. Diving for Arizona State. Same dive from Brescher.
Exactly, a front 2.5 pike. I thought this one was a little bit better. Got a little bit more height off of the diving board. Again, a great pike position in the air. You want to make sure those knees are straight, toes perfectly pointed. It's a pretty easy dive for these women, so they have to execute it very well.
Some 7s, a 7.5 for McCool. It's now all 7 judges up in scoring. 50.40. Exact same score from Bretcher on that same dive. And our first look at Megan O'Brien, the senior from Concord, Massachusetts, an NCAA qualifier the last 3 years at the 3-meter height for the 2-time Big 12 champ.
Pretty good dive to start the meet. Unfortunately, it looks like she took it a little bit conservative as she was coming out of that twist and reaching for the water. Doesn't quite get all the way to vertical, and she easily can. She's the strongest diver in this competition, so it's not a matter of if she can. It looks like she was holding back a little bit, trying to control the dive, and unfortunately leaves it a little bit short.
46.20, finished second in the Big 12 championships last year, won this event at the 2017 UT Diving Invitational, was 25th after prelims at NCAA. Senior Murphy Bromberg from Bexley, Ohio, the 3-time All-American, 4-time Big 12 champ, the reigning Big 12 Diver of the Year on the women's side, in with her first dive.
She's going to be disappointed in that. Again, a more easy dive to kick things off in a front 2.5 pike, and instead of coming out of that pike position early and seeing the water and reaching for it, she lets it over-rotate, which is why she also had a bit more of a splash than you're used to seeing from Murphy.
Well, in the same dive we saw from Bretcher and McCool that scored a 50.40, Bromberg with a 43.2 to start off her competition. Had a good morning, as did Alicia Blagg, the sophomore from Leeds, England. Won this event at the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Also at the double duel against Boston College and FAU so far this fall. The ACC champion last year.
She did something similar to Murphy. Now, I think she got a little bit more height off of the diving board. It looked terrific in the air. She has a beautiful pike position. Her chest is perfectly flat onto her legs in a nice tight pike. However, again, over-rotates it, comes out. You see that splash coming from those legs hitting the water a little bit past vertical.
I've seen that 105B now from 4 of the competitors. That the lowest scoring outside of Bromberg's, 44.40 for Blagg. Allison Gibson will close out the opening round of dives. The junior Texas Longhorn from here in Austin, Texas. 2017 NCAA 1-meter champ, 2-time All-American.
Now that is how most of these divers were probably hoping to complete that dive. See a little bit of a splash there when she hits the water if you're getting a little nitpicky. She gets so much height from that hurdle. She's able to come out of that pike position so early and just floats it around. If she had a better rip, that would have been 9s, but I think she'll take, especially in this competition, 7.5 8s.
So 5 of the 8 compete the 105B to kick things off, and none better than Allison Gibson. 55.20 puts her atop the leaderboard.
I'm looking forward to seeing what these athletes are able to do once they step up their degree of difficulty. A lot of them are starting with that 105B, that front 2.5. It's an easier dive, kind of get some of those nervous jitters out. Now we're going to see the field kind of separate a little bit with a lot more difficult diving coming.
So keep an eye on that DD as each diver steps up. That multiplier can be the differentiator as Gibson, Brescher, McCool all compete the same 3 dives. That 1, 2, 3 through 1 round of diving, 5 to go. Brescher back up, qualified for the NCAAs last year in the 1-meter and platform. Was 6th. Coming off the recently completed ACC Big Ten Challenge, but did win this 3-meter event, double duel against Tennessee and Wisconsin.
That was a good dive, a little bit short. And I think what happens is as she was taking off from the diving board, instead of staying over her toes as much as she needed to and really getting aggressive coming off the board, she let it fall back a little bit. So she didn't completely make it all the way to vertical, but that's a tough dive, and I thought it was a very well executed dive.
54 even puts her at 104.40. Brooke Schultz, DD of 3.0, forward 2.5 somersault, 1 twist pike.
Now there's the NCAA champion. That is one of her more difficult dives of the competition. Her next 2 dives are also very difficult. But she is so confident on the end of this diving board. Perfect position in the air before twisting, lands vertical. We haven't seen that from a lot of these divers. They're struggling to find vertical. Barely a splash.
And a very good score. See 8s, 7.5s for 70.50 for the reigning NCAA champ. She looks to make that back-to-back. It will happen here in the spring. It's a big reason why a lot of these teams have chosen to come here in the fall and get this tune-up. Haley Allen up on a 107C.
Just doesn't quite make it all the way around. She needed to get a little bit more out of that diving board. A little bit more height and really get aggressive coming off the board, getting into that tuck position in order to complete those 3.5 rotations. Unfortunately, she just doesn't have it there and leaves it short.
Reflected in the scores as low as a 4. All the way up to a 6, 40.60 for Haley Allen. Ashley McCool will dive next. Open things off. Strong?
Yeah, I want this last name. Can we talk about that for a second? Ashley McCool with an inward 2.5 tuck. It suits her demeanor. She always looks very calm on the diving board as well. Seems pretty unflappable.
Finished 33rd at last year's NCAA championships, 2nd place at the Pac-12 championships, 5th place finish at the World University Games in August of 2017. DD of 2.7 on this dive.
Very well done. I think what we'll see here on the replay, look for as she's hitting the water, her body twists just a little bit. This dive looks great in the air. A good tight tuck position, but as she's reaching here, you see how you can see both her legs as she's hitting the water. That right there is going to cause the judges to take a point or 2 off.
Lots of sixes, 2 sevens, and a 7.5. 51.30 for the sophomore from Arizona State. Second dive for Megan O'Brien. Coming off a third place finish in this event against UCLA.
That was a great dive. A little bit too much of a splash. She's always struggled on her entries. I think one of the things they've always tried to work on is improving that rip when she hits the water. She's incredibly powerful, so strong coming off the diving board, so she can easily complete some of these more difficult dives. She just needs to clean up that entry in order to see some of the higher scores she's looking for.
Brother Sean was a diver here at Texas. Mom Michelle, a gymnast at Northeastern University. 58.50. Dad Steven, a rower at Notre Dame.
Just a couple athletes.
Maybe a competitive family.
Just a few athletes in the family.
Breaking down some of that you had just addressed with head coach Scoggin. Now teammate Murphy Bromberg.
Oh, that's a great way to come back from a disappointing first round. A front 3.5 tuck. Great distance from the diving board. Sometimes you'll see divers kind of put this dive out a little bit too far into the middle of the pool. She stays close to the board, great position in the air. She has a better rip than that normally when she hits the water, but it's definitely an improvement over her first round.
Murphy Bromberg won this 3-meter event at the Big 12 Championships in her sophomore year, but then red shirts both 2015-16 and the 16-17 season. Coming off a junior year, which she finished third in the Big 12 Championship, but she won the platform event, finished second in platform at the NCAA, so really look forward to seeing her on Friday in the platform event as Alicia Blagg up on the 205B, DD of 3.0.
This is a back 2.5 pike, and she's the first diver that we've seen competing this dive so far in the event. Wow, and she set the standard with that. That looked great in the air. She looked really confident coming off of the diving board. Gets into that pike position quickly, makes that dive around easily, and lands perfectly vertical. That's a great back 2.5 for her.
Well, and you mentioned it earlier today, these divers doing the same dives generally, just in different orders, and that's how you differentiate yourself. Even 63. Can you nail said dives better than the rest of the field?
Exactly.
Schultz competed this dive earlier in round number 2. See what Gibson has.
Wow. She actually, and I thought Brooke Schultz was great. I think she just outplayed her on this one. Amazing height off of the diving board. Her hurdle generates so much power and height off of the board. She's gotten so much stronger. She makes this dive easily, but then also has an entry, unlike what we've seen so far in the competition.
Well, we talked about at top of the show, figures to be a great competition between the duo from the University of Texas and the reigning NCAA champion. Brooke Schultz was in first prior to Allison Gibson. Heading to the board with that same dive, she registers a 69, and that will put her in first place. So a great competition we have going through 2 rounds. Come back for 3 and 4 in the women's 3-meter. Rounds 3 and 4 to come. Emily Brescher will kick things off. It was Allison Gibson with that great dive to close out round number 2. They put her atop the leaderboard. Brescher currently in 6th. 205B, her third dive.
That was a good dive for her. I think some of the things she has to work on and probably is trying to focus on is kind of pointing her toes, the little details, now that she's very comfortable and can make this dive easily. It's just things like making sure her knees are perfectly straight and things are a little bit more polished is what's going to get her closer to those 7s and 8s that she can keep up with some of the other competition with.
Qualified for the NCAAs on the 1 meter in the platform last year, so still working on that 3 meter, which she finished 18th at last year's Big Ten Championships. This the dive that Schultz struggled with this morning, a 34.10, looking for redemption here.
It's a little bit better. Definitely an improvement from her preliminary round, but not as well as she has competed it in the past. A front 3.5 in the pike position. She doesn't get as much out of that diving board as I've seen her get. You really, on a dive like that, need every ounce of height and power off of that board, and maybe the rhythm's a little bit off. She still manages to squeak it around, but not as well as I know she's capable of doing.
Oh, nearly 21 points higher than what she had seen this morning. You had pointed out earlier, big reason why she's diving second in this order, so improvement, but not to her general expectations. Haley Allen is the dive that Gibson nailed, best we've seen thus far.
And you know what? That was a really great dive as well. Maybe not as well executed as Allison Gibson. She didn't have the same kind of height off of the diving board, which is something these judges are looking for. However, she makes it around a little bit past vertical with that splash, but is able to keep her body tight, her legs together, going from a rotation into that twist, which is something a lot of divers struggle with.
So 55.50 for Haley Allen. Forward 3.5 somersault tuck for McCool.
Wow, what a dive. What a dive. She has excellent power off the diving board. She really gets into a tight tuck position, and you see just how quickly she's able to rotate and complete those 3.5 rotations. Kicks out at the perfect time so that it's vertical with barely a splash.
3 7.5s and 8, 6.5 the low score, 61.60. The score, dive number 3 for Ashley McCool. Megan O'Brien, forward 3.5 somersault tuck, exact same dive.
Very similar dive. Now, Megan O'Brien here comes out of that tuck position just a fraction of a second early. So you can tell she's got so much strength and so much power, but she's also trying to control it and make sure that she doesn't over-rotate some of these dives that she can make so easily. Here, unfortunately, she came out a little bit early, but still a very well-executed front 3.5.
Score similar. 4 7s of 58.80, a 163.50 total thus far for Megan O'Brien as Murphy Bromberg come up to dive on a back 2.5 somersault pike.
Oh, now we haven't seen many of these dives yet. That was pretty good. She left it a little bit short of vertical, but you could hear that popping sound. She's got an excellent rip. She is a platform diver, and I think a lot of times platform divers can have really great entries into the water. Her back is arched there as she's hitting the water, and you see that splash sort of go back towards the diving board and back towards the side of the pool. That's an indication that she's just a little bit short of vertical where she wants to be, but still a solid back 2.5.
Score 58.50. You had mentioned that earlier about platform divers. Why is that?
You know what? I don't know. One of the things that makes a platform diver excel up on tower is that entry. So it's one of those things, I think if you're a great tower diver, you have a great entry, and they're able to transition that onto the 3-meter event as well.
Third place after 2 rounds, Alicia Black, 2-time Olympian for her native country of England.
Now this is the dive she struggled on the most this morning. She only got 4s, a handful of 4.5s earlier in the preliminary round. This is a slight improvement to that. She still doesn't make it quite all the way. Maybe need to hold on to that pike a little bit longer, and instead doesn't complete the full 3.5 rotations. Improvement
from this morning, a 38.75, that a 54.25 for Alicia Black in her third dive as the leader with a hook'em through 2 dives, Allison Gibson.
actually, you know what? She almost did something a little similar where she came out of that pike position just a hair early and tried to save it. She realized it and instead tried to reach for the water to get herself to vertical. Right there, she comes out just a little too early and she tries to just squeak it in, which is where she has a lot of splash there coming off of her body as she hits the water.
So does that open up a window for the rest of the competition? 51.15. Gibson still in first place, but by just 0.05 over the reigning NCAA champion after 3 rounds. Good leaderboard we have developing.
This is exciting. Look how close that is from Murphy Bromberg in 5th place all the way to Allison Gibson. You're only looking at about 12 points being the difference. And when you have 3 more dives to compete, this is anyone's event still. And
when you talk about DDs of 3.0, maybe higher, that could maybe be the difference between like a 7, 7.5 that could make up that?
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing about the degree difficulty that you have to remember is that you want a higher degree difficulty. You want to be competing these harder dives. I love seeing athletes really going for it and going for some more difficult dives, but you have to strike a balance between that and also dives that you can compete well. You don't want to just throw some of these big dives that you're not necessarily going to make. You have to look at dives that you're also consistent on. Speaking of consistency, Emily is nothing but consistent so far. A reverse 2.5 pike, a difficult dive for a lot of these women. She makes it look very easy. A little bit of a splash there, but in general, her best dive of the night, and she's excited about it.
Heard her teammates as well pumped for the sophomore. 61.50 solid scores for her 4th dive of the competition. Brooke Schultz, reverse 2.5 somersault pike. Same dive we just saw from Bretcher.
Oh, you know what? Not executed quite as well. She looked a little bit slow in that rotation and had to arch her back and really try to pull that dive into the water. You can see it right there. You see that arch. So it looks like she's vertical, but has a little bit too much of a splash, and a little bit of a deduction will come from having to try and pull it in like that.
55.50, 230.80 for the sophomore Razorback. First of 2 back 2.5 somersault tucks we will see here in round 4, starting with Haley Allen.
Oh, that's disappointing. This was by far her best dive in the preliminary event. She scored 8s on it earlier today and then comes out, maybe gets a little bit cautious or just a little too excited. You see right there, she comes out of that tuck way too early and doesn't complete the full 2.5 flips.
4 4.5s, 2 5s, and a 4, 37.80 for Allen. It's Ashley McCool. It's part of that group within striking distance, 5th place after round 3, same dive.
Now that actually had a great entry on it. The thing about it is half of the field is competing that dive in the pike position. So if you are going to, this thing is perfect. She's a little bit over rotated there. Her feet look a little bit over when she hits the water. Maybe a foot or so too far away from the diving board. 7s from most of the judges, 2 7.5s because it was a very clean entry. But eventually she's going to want to look at doing that in the pike position in order to be able to compete with your Brooke Schultz and your Murphy Brombergs.
Megan O'Brien will compete the same dive that Schultz did. It was a 55.50 for the NCAA champ.
Oh, and unfortunately it's going to be much lower for Megan O'Brien. She's coming off a hamstring strain, tweaked her hamstring recently. She's also been sick a lot, so I know she hasn't been practicing as much as Coach Goggin would like to see, and I think we're seeing that here. She never really gets all the way into that pike position like she needs to, comes out of that dive way too early, and as you can see there, doesn't quite make those 2.5 flips all the way around.
Had jumped up into 3rd place after her round 3 dive, but a 37.50, so a big difference between what we had seen from Schultz. Now Murphy Bromberg. DD of 2.8 on this reverse 2.5 somersault tuck.
Wow, that was excellent. I think she'd like to see, and Coach Goggin would like to see a better entry when she hits the water. She had an opportunity to really nail that dive. She put a perfect rip on the bottom of that. We'd be looking at 9s. Unfortunately, you'll see here a little bit of a splash coming off her body as she hits the water, so most judges are going 7, 7.5.
Currently in grad school for sports management as she registers a 60.20. A lot of her career over the last 2 years has been about coming back from injuries, but she's excelled throughout the years in platform, but part of that comeback and that process has allowed her to get better on the springboards.
Absolutely. She's predominantly a tower diver and has excelled up there over the years, but since she wasn't able to practice up there after surgery, she really worked on her 1 meter and 3 meter diving, and it's made a difference.
Same dive we saw from O'Brien from Blagg.
Oh, and that was much better. You can see there she makes it all the way to vertical. Doesn't struggle either to pull that dive around. Great position in the air, great pike position, pointed toes. A little bit of a splash there you can see coming off of her shoulders as she hits the water though.
Waiting her score. Even 63 on dive number 4 for Alicia Blagg. Put her into 2nd place, trailing Brooke Schultz as of now. Same dive coming up from Gibson.
Now, one of the things Coach Goggin told me about Allison Gibson is just how much she has improved in her overall strength since she's been here. And I think it's so obvious when you see dives like that. Unfortunately, it's almost like she was a little too strong, too aggressive on that. Didn't come out of the pike position in time because of how fast she was rotating and over-rotates it. However, what I love to see right now is how much height she's getting off the diving board. She's so powerful right now and making these dives so easily. It's just a matter of fine-tuning things, making sure she sees her spots and reaching for the water on time.
Coach Scoggins saying that Gibson has improved her vertical 4 to 5 inches since her freshman year, but a 54, so not quite what saw from Blagg, and that will shake the leaderboard up once again as Brooke Schultz, the NCAA champ, now atop in 1st, but trailing her, Allison Gibson. 2 rounds left in the women's 3 meter title. To determine a champion in the women's 3 meter here at the 2018 University of Texas Hall of Fame Diving Invitational. Tyler Denning, Kat LaRocca, what a competition it has turned into be. 1st through 6th. Look at that jam-packed leaderboard, just 8.7 points separating them.
I love it. This is so exciting. It could honestly go to any of those top 6 women that you see right there. When you look at the dives that they have coming up, anybody can make a move right now.
So 5th time through, it'll start with Emily Bretcher, and you had mentioned it when we were in break. She has the hardest dives left in the dive order with a DD of 3.1 and a 3.0, and also what she has been, it seems, the most consistent of any of the divers thus far.
She has. It's funny. It looks like she surprised herself on her last round. Her reverse 2.5 pike is what she struggled in preliminaries, and she managed to excel. She did these dives well earlier today. And that seems to continue. A little bit too much of a splash when she hits the water. She kind of rolls her body into the pool a little bit. It's still vertical. She makes the 3.5 rotations, no problem. And I like her position in the air as well. Just right here, you see her sort of roll her body in, creating that splash. But for a 3.1 degree of difficulty, it's very much going to keep her in the running.
Lots of 6.5s, just 1.6, a 60.45, 284.85 for Bretcher. Should keep her very much within the contest. Is this another dive that Schultz had struggled with this morning? What's the key to this back 2.5 somersault pike?
For this, it's going to be making sure on her takeoff she takes off at the right angle and confidently, and then that she sees her spot and comes out and reaches for the water at the right time. A little bit too sluggish there. Looked like she got a lot out of that diving board, but not quite enough to make this all the way around. Comes out, has to arch her back a little bit, and still leaves it a little bit short, which is where that splash is. That could be the difference right there between being able to win this event. We'll just have to see how things play out.
An even 51, scored a 36 this morning, so improvement from the morning competition. But now falls behind Brettscher, so she was in first through 4 rounds. Competition heating up. Haley Allen, 305C.
You know what? She had to check herself a little bit on her hurdle, so I really like that she was able to keep her composure and come out with a really solid reverse 2.5. You see she was just a little unbalanced there in her hurdle. It doesn't seem to phase her. Stays confident, gets some good height off of the board. Some good scores from the judges.
6.5s and 7s of 57.40 for Haley Allen. Now Ashley McCool, so 6 divers really in this one. She was in 6th, but just 8.7 points away from first place. Same dive we just saw from Haley Allen, from McCool.
Oh, look at that height she got off the diving board. That was not quite what she was able to compete this morning. Way over rotated. Love it in the air. Look at that height. Kicks out just a hair too late and just lets it float past vertical. Receiving some 4s, some 5, 5.5s. Actually quite a range of scores from the judges. It's interesting when you see a 6 and a 4 on the same board. I kind of wonder what each of those judges saw. But either way, they're dropped anyway, and she'll keep the 5s.
So where do you put that dive at?
As far as what I would score
What you would score it?
I probably would have scored it a 5. I loved the top of that dive. I think she was really dynamic in the air. Unfortunately, she just needs to see her spot and kick at the right time.
Megan O'Brien, 205B.
Oh, that was a little bit of a redemption dive for her. She was very unhappy with her reverse 2.5 pike. So for her back 2.5 pike, she is strong and confident off the diving board. She doesn't hold back at all. A little bit of an arch there, but manages to hit the water perfectly vertical.
So that dive that you were just talking about really has taken her out of contention, but a good bounce back dive. 58.50 for Megan O'Brien.
And if I'm Matt Scoggin, that's what I want to see. At this point, when their athletes struggle on a dive, okay, how do they respond to it?
Murphy Bromberg was in 5th place prior to the beginning of this round. And she jump up the leaderboard.
She might with that dive. Matt Scoggin likes it, and he should. It's a difficult dive, a full out. You're doing a forward 2.5 twist or 2.5 flips with a full twist in there. A little bit of a splash there when she hits the water because she kind of can't pull all that water under with her. But she's rewarded for a really solid dive.
Has 3 dives that have a DD of 3.0, this being one of them, and a high score in 66 will put Bromberg up into first place after 5 dives. 2 left to close out round number 5. Alicia Blagg was in 3rd place. This is her second easiest dive. 2 dives in the DDs of 2. This is a 2.7 on the inward 2.5 somersault tuck.
We heard Allison Gibson talking earlier about just what the experience of international competition can do to help you grow as a diver. Alicia Blagg, now having been in 2 Olympic Games, can definitely relate. Oh, and you can see it there. She's able to keep her composure. A really tight race. It's one of her easier dives. She should be competing it that well. But that's beautiful. That's probably one of the best dives we've seen in the entire competition when she's under pressure like this.
And reflected in the scores from the judges, 4 8s, 2 7.5s, a 64.80. That will keep Blagg right within the competition, trailing Bromberg by just 0.05 as Gibson will close out round number 5. Same dive we saw from Megan O'Brien and Brooke Schultz. It's the back 2.5 somersault pike.
And her best dive in the preliminary round. Oh, but she's not able to do it again. Doesn't get everything she needs out of the diving board. Just looks a little sluggish in the air. So she isn't able to fully complete this dive. Reaches for the water as hard as she can, but just...
Gibson Blagg through 4 rounds, so awaiting the scores for Allison Gibson and how that will shake up the leader. 5.5 and even 48 as we now have a completely rearranged leaderboard, Kat.
I told you this was going to be exciting. Honestly, when you've got that many divers within 8 points of each other, especially in a 3-meter event where there's a lot of room for error, this is going to get exciting. The same exact thing can happen, quite honestly, coming into this next round. You're still separated by only 8 points now for that top 4. So let's look and see if Brooke Schultz is able to kind of nail her last dive, put her back in the running, or if Murphy Bromberg can stay solid. This is going to be exciting.
The 3 Bs up top, Bromberg, Blagg, Brettscher. Brettscher will begin the final round. DD of 3.0 on the forward 2.5, 1 twist pike with a somersault in there.
There you go. It's a tricky one. Although it doesn't look very tricky for Emily, if I'm being honest.
They didn't look good.
Her teammates you see there, really excited. What a list she just put together of 6 dives. She was just solid and steady the whole way through. Really improved from her preliminary round as well, which I'm sure her coach Adam Soldati will be excited to see. She's loving it.
Big smile from Brettscher to close out her dives for the day.
I think we're having some issues with some of the judges' scorecards, or not cards, but
keypads.
The keypads that they use, just to show you how long ago I dove. They still occasionally had scorecards. Yeah, I think we're seeing a little bit of trouble. They're having to manually input some of these scores, but they are in and they are phenomenal. 7.5, 7.5, 7s, even 1.8, was that 8 or 6.5 from one of the judges. 63.
347.85 is now the mark. Brettscher was in 3rd, now in 1st. Brooke Schultz was in 1st through 4 rounds, dropped down to 4th. But this, a dive, she can make that ground up. A DD of 3.0 on the 405B.
Oh, this is going to be close. That was a terrific dive. An inward 2.5 pike. Her pike position is stunning. You can see her chest perfectly on her legs. Legs straight, toes pointed.
Wow. See the scores coming in for Schultz, the 8s, but a 6.5 and even 66, and Kat 347.80 for the reigning NCAA champ. She trails Brettscher by 0.05.
Oh man, she'd like to have a few dives back. This wasn't her best competition. There's still 1 or 2 dives that I'm sure she's going to go home and really work on over the next couple weeks because she's going to be frustrated with them.
But you talked about earlier why it's so important, these competitors wanting to be here, coaches wanting to be here, NCAAs will be here. That's where Schultz excelled last year as Haley Allen is in with her final dives. But that's what you want to see from competitors, how they bounce back throughout the competition.
Absolutely. At this point in the season, you're still in the weight room quite a bit. Maybe they've had a few days off to kind of rest a little bit for this event, but you're not trying to peak right now. This is where you're really starting to get into the grind in the middle of the season. You're going to kind of be pretty tired coming off of a lot of dual meets, and this gives you a pretty good idea of where your divers are unrested and kind of how they're mentally handling a very long 3 days of competition.
Allen will close out her day, as will Ashley McCool. Forward 2.5 somersault, 1 twist pike. I got it that time.
You did. You nailed it that time. Proud of you. Oh, I'm proud of McCool. That was awesome. What a great dive. Again, we've seen this from a lot of other divers in the competition, and that's one of the best we've seen all night. There's a lot going on in that dive. You are completing 2.5 flips. You're also throwing a full twist in there at the end, and she looks solid the whole way through.
And much to the point that we were just talking about, struggled her last dive, but Frank, she's actually broken a diving board.
That's incredible. I've actually never heard of a woman doing that.
So the strength and the power from Megan O'Brien and where she's at.
She's proud. She should be. That's amazing.
I think if you break a diving board, the coaching staff will be happily coming.
Yeah, she's just gonna mount that in her living room, I'm sure, in the future.
What are you looking for from O'Brien to close out this day one of competition?
I think to your point, a lot of this is just kind of mentally sticking with it after struggling and stumbling through a couple of dives, closing out the meet strong. It's a good way to end it. When she hits the water, her body twists a little bit. You can see she kind of twists towards the judges. So on the replay, you'll see actually both of her legs when she hits the water right there, which they're going to deduct for along with the splash. But in general, I think you want to see she's come off some injuries and been sick a little bit. You just want to see her sort of mentally kind of keep her composure through this event.
Even score of 54, Coach Scoggin saying maybe part of that, she works with kids a lot throughout her majors, so maybe why she's been sick so much throughout the fall.
They're like little petri dishes. You can't you can't avoid getting sick around them. But no, I think once she gets herself healthy, she's a force to be reckoned with at the end of the season.
Murphy Bromberg, the leader through 5 rounds. Can she close out and potentially stay in first?
Oh, that might do it. That might do it. That was a really great dive. I love her pike position in the air. She really is such a graceful diver, but at the same time, really strong and powerful. And it's going to be enough. If we look at these scores, we're seeing them come through from the judges, a couple 7.5s, a few 7s. And in general, that should be enough to put her in the lead, at least with 2 divers to go.
It was Bromberg, Blagg, Brettscher. Brettscher was in first at 347.85, obviously 354. High enough for Bromberg to be in first place. But Blagg, still something to say about that with his forward 2.5 somersault, 1 twist pike, DD of 3.0. Can she catch Bromberg?
Oh man, and this was her best dive in the preliminary round, even scoring some 8s, which is tough to do in the morning. Oh, that might do it. Wow. This is shaping up to be such a close race. I'm excited to see what these scores come through as. I don't have much to say about this dive other than it was phenomenal. So much height off the diving board, beautiful position in the air, and barely a splash when she hits the water. When
the score's starting to come in, the lowest is 7.5, and that'll tell you everything you need to know. Solid 8s across, an 8.5, 72, the 361.45, good enough to put her into first.
It is, and I think she has that locked down. Allison Gibson cannot catch her, so Alicia Blagg just won Texas Invite for, I think, the first time for her.
2-time Olympian Alicia Blagg, the ACC champion in the 3 meters, already got a couple titles to her name in the fall, as Gibson will close it out. 405C. It's her second easiest dive.
Oh, and it's a beautiful dive. Slightly over-rotated. She's got a lot of... She's rotating so quickly. Just needs to come out a hair earlier. Reaches for the water. Leaves a little bit of a splash there as a result. Disappointing finals for Allison. You can see there on her face. But again, at this point in the season, it's just good experience under her belt.
51.30 for her final dive at 328.65. It's the trio of Bs atop Alicia Blagg, the champion.